Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku survived the fall of UA. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The end of the world did not begin with a bang. It began with the dryness of a human eye. Nito Monoma was screaming inside his own mind. His eyelids felt like sandpaper rubbing against raw nerves. Every instinct in his biology, every evolutionary command written into his DNA over millions of years, was screaming at him to blink. To wash the cornea. To reset. Don't. If you close them, we die. If you close them, the world ends. Beside him, Shota Aizawa was a statue of ragged determination. The underground hero was bleeding from where a piece of stray debris had clipped his forehead, the red stream cutting a path through the grime on his face. But his eyes, those terrifying, red glowing eyes, did not waver. They were fixed on the monster in the center of the arena. The floating fortress of UA, the sky coffin, hummed with the electric tension of 1,000 solenoids keeping them suspended in the clouds. The air smelled of ozone, burnt sugar, and the metallic tang of blood. In the center of the arena, Tamura Shigaraki, or the thing that wore his face, laughed. It wasn't a human sound. It was the sound of a structural fracture, deep and grinding. He was suspended in a web of best jeanists carbon fiber cables, his body torn and regenerating. You're really trying, Shigaraki rasped, his voice vibrating through the floor plates. You're trying so hard to play God. To keep the devil in a cage. Shut him up! Bakugo roared, blasting across the arena with an explosion that rattled Monoma's teeth. Deku! Now! Izuku Midoriya was a blur of green lightning. He moved faster than sound, the air cracking behind him as he pivoted in midair. He was tired. His bones ached with a deep, resonant frequency that he knew was the limit of one for all. He had been fighting for what felt like an eternity, but it had only been minutes. Gear shift. Low gear. High inertia. Izuku swung his leg, the air pressure alone denting the steel floor below. Detroit. Smash! The impact connected with Shigaraki's chest. The villain folded, spitting a glob of black ichor, but his hand lashed out, fingers splayed. Erasure! Monoma choked out, his voice cracking. I still have him, but the universe is cruel, and probability is a tyrant. A microscopic piece of dust, kicked up by the force of Izuku's smash, drifted through the chaotic wind currents of the arena. It bypassed the filtration systems. It bypassed the chaotic winds of the battle. It found its home in Nito Monoma's right eye. The reflex was involuntary. It was faster than thought. Monoma blinked. For 0.1 seconds, the red glow of erasure vanished. In that fraction of a second, the suppression lifting from Tamura Shigaraki felt like the door of a blast furnace being kicked open. The quirk factor, compressed and boiling beneath the surface of Aizawa's negation, exploded outward. Shigaraki's hand, still reaching, brushed the floor. Found you, Shigaraki whispered. The sound was unique. It wasn't the sound of breaking. It was the sound of unmaking. A wave of gray-blue energy rippled out from Shigaraki's fingertips. It moved faster than fire, faster than the eye could track. The reinforced hyperalloy of the UA barrier didn't melt. It didn't shatter. It simply ceased to be solid. It turned to dust, crumbling into a fine, gray powder that was instantly whipped away by the high-altitude winds. Eraser! Present Mike screamed from the control deck, watching the monitor spike into the red. But it was too late. The decay wave hit the electromagnetic levitation pylons. The very things keeping millions of tons of steel and concrete suspended 5,000 feet in the air. The hum of the fortress died. For a heartbeat, there was a sensation of weightlessness. The entire arena, the support structures, the cameras, the heroes, everything lifted slightly as momentum carried them upward for one final, tragic second. Then, gravity reclaimed its debt. The sky coffin broke in half. DKU! Bakugo's scream was swallowed by the roar of tearing metal. Izuku watched in horror as the floor beneath Bakugo disintegrated. The blonde hero fired an explosion to propel himself upward, but the debris was falling faster than he could fly. No! Izuku screamed. Black Whip exploded from his back, not as distinct tendrils, but as a chaotic, desperate web of black energy. Fourth user, danger sense. The quirk didn't just buzz. It stabbed into Izuku's brain like a hot knife. The danger wasn't coming from an attack. The danger was everywhere. The danger was the sky itself. The fortress tilted 45 degrees. Heroes and villains alike began to slide. Best Jeanist tried to anchor the students with cables, but the anchor points were dissolving into dust. The decay is spreading to the support block. Momo Yaoyoro's voice came over the comms, shrill with terror. The electrical barrier is down. We're falling. Izuku looked down. Through the widening cracks in the floor, past the crumbling steel, he saw the clouds parting. And below the clouds, the green and gray patchwork of the Japanese countryside. They were falling. They were all going to die. Think. Think, Nana! Izuku screamed internally. All might. First. What do I do? You cannot stop the fall. The first user's voice was grim, echoing in the vault of his mind. The mass is too great. The structure is compromised. I have to try. Izuku bit his tongue so hard blood filled his mouth. He ignored Shigaraki, who was cackling as he fell amidst the ruin, riding a slab of concrete like a surfboard into the abyss. Izuku turned his back on the enemy. Black whip, phantom chain, the black energy surged out, covering miles in seconds. Izuku targeted the largest chunks of the fortress, the sections holding the students, the sections holding the unconscious heroes. He lashed the whips around them, binding the disintegrating island together. He activated float. The sensation was akin to trying to hold back a tidal wave with a paper shield. The weight of the fortress hit him. His arms felt like they were being ripped from their sockets. The humerus in his right arm snapped instantly, the sound lost in the chaos. Izuku screamed, a raw, animalistic sound, but he didn't let go. Fly! He roared at himself. Fly, damn it! He flared one for all to 100%. Green lightning arced off him so violently it vaporized the rain falling around them. He tried to generate upward thrust, to act as a parachute for the city block-sized debris he had tethered. He slowed it down. He could feel it. He was fighting gravity, and for a second, he was winning. Then, a shadow fell over him. Shigaraki leapt from a falling debris chunk. He didn't have his quirks fully under control, but he had enough strength to propel himself. He slammed into Izuku's exposed back. Let go, hero! Shigaraki laughed, his fingers digging into Izuku's shoulder. Decay flared. Izuku's skin cracked. The pain was blinding. If he fought back, he would have to drop the fortress. If he didn't fight back, he would turn to dust. I won't let you kill them! Izuku choked out. He made a choice. He released one of the black whip tendrils, the one holding a massive, empty section of the runway, and whipped it around, slamming the concrete slab into Shigaraki. The villain was knocked away, spinning into the void, but the distraction cost Izuku. The concentration broke. Float faltered for a microsecond. The momentum returned. The ground rushed up to meet them. Brace for impact. Mandalay's telepathic scream pierced every mind in a 10-mile radius. Izuku saw the ground. It was a forest. He saw trees looking like toothpicks. Detroit. Izuku pulled his good arm back, aiming not at a villain, but at the earth itself. He needed an air cushion. He needed to create a counterforce. Smayawash. He punched the air downward with everything he had left. The pressure wave was catastrophic. It flattened the forest below, blasting a crater into the earth before the fortress even touched it. The air resistance slowed the falling mountain of steel just enough, just barely enough, to turn a liquidation event into a survivable crash. Then, the world went white. The sound of the impact was so loud it deafened anyone within 20 miles. The earth liquefied. The sky coffin plowed into the crust of Japan, tearing a scar into the land 3 miles long. Dust rose into the stratosphere, blotting out the sun. Darkness followed. And then silence. Day 1. The tomb. Time had no meaning in the dark. There was only pressure. And pain. Izuku Midoriya existed in a state between life and death. He was aware of his heartbeat, slow, thudding, irregular. Thump, thump, thump. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. Am I dead? No, a voice whispered. It was sharp, militaristic. Not yet, ninth. Izuku tried to open his eyes, but there was nothing to see. He was encased in something hard. It wasn't rubble. It felt smooth, warm. I took the liberty, the voice continued. It was the second user, Kudo. When the impact occurred, your body was failing. Gearshift isn't just for speed. It alters the behavior of cells on a quantum level. I shifted your cellular density. I crystallized the air and dust around you. Izuku's mind was sluggish. Everyone else? Unknown. The silence was heavy. Izuku tried to expand his senses. He tried to reach for danger sense, but the quirk was silent. He tried to summon Black Whip, but his body screamed in protest. He felt shattered. His right arm was useless. His ribs felt like a jigsaw puzzle. He was buried deep. How long? 3 days, Kudo replied. You've been in a coma. The oxygen in this pocket is running out. The crystallization is degrading. You need to move, ninth. Now. 3 days? Panic surged through him, adrenaline kick-starting his heart. 3 days? The battle? Shigaraki? His friends? Kaken? He rasped. His voice was a dry croak. Uraraka? No answer. Just the shifting of the earth above him. Izuku pushed. The crystallized shell around him cracked. It shattered like glass, dissolving into motes of red light. Instantly, the weight of the rubble pressed in. Soil and twisted metal squeezed him. He was suffocating. Dig, the first user urged. Use the cowl. Use the shoot style. Dig. Izuku activated one for all. He couldn't manage 100%. He could barely manage 5%. The green lightning flickered weakly, illuminating the dirt in stroboscopic flashes. He clawed upward. His fingernails tore. He hit a steel plate, part of the fortress wall. He punched it, his knuckles splitting, denting the metal enough to squeeze through. He crawled through the wreckage of what used to be the ultimate defense system. He crawled past twisted wires that sparked feebly. He crawled past the crushed helmet of a hero he didn't recognize. He hoped it was empty. He didn't check. Up. He had to go up. His lungs burned. The air grew thinner. He felt dizzy, the edges of his vision graying out. Don't stop, Nana Shimura's voice was weeping. Please, Izuku. Don't stop. He dug for hours. Or maybe minutes, and then his hand broke through. Cold air. Real air. Izuku gasped, choking on dust, and pulled himself up. He dragged his broken body out of the grave, rolling onto his back, staring up at the sky. It was gray. Thick, choking clouds of dust blocked out the sun, turning the day into a perpetual twilight. Ash fell like snow, coating everything in a layer of pale death. Izuku lay there for a long time, just breathing. Every breath hurt. Eventually he sat up. He wished he hadn't. He was sitting on the rim of a crater that stretched as far as the eye could see. The UA fortress didn't look like a fortress anymore. It looked like a crashed starship, a twisted skeleton of steel ribs jutting out of the earth. Fires were still burning in the distance, small orange dots in the gray haze. Hello? Izuku called out. The sound died instantly, swallowed by the vastness of the destruction. He stood up, swaying. His legs trembled. He wrapped his tattered cape, Gran Torino's cape, tighter around his shoulders. He began to walk down into the crater. The wreckage was a labyrinth. He passed sections of the school hallways, now twisted at impossible angles. He saw a chalkboard, miraculously intact, with present mixed English lessons still written on it. He found the first body 10 minutes later. It was a pro hero. Magic hero, majestic. He was half buried under a slab of concrete. His wand snapped in two. Izuku stopped. He felt the bile rise in his throat. He fell to his knees, checking for a pulse that he knew wasn't there. The body was cold. Rigor mortis had come and gone. I'm sorry, Izuku whispered. I'm so sorry. He kept moving. He had to find Class 1A. He had to find the teachers. He reached what looked like the remains of the central plaza. This was where the evacuation block had been secured. It was gone. There was a massive impact furrow where the block should have been. It looked like it had been dragged. Izuku followed the trail. The ash crunched under his red boots. He found the block a mile away. It had been ripped open. Ochako! He screamed, running toward the wreckage. Ida! Tsu! The interior was a slaughterhouse of metal. Seats were torn from their bolts. But there were no bodies. There was blood, dried, dark stains on the floor and walls, but no bodies. They survived the crash. Or some of them did. Izuku scanned the area. He saw footprints in the ash. Drag marks. Villains? He rushed outside, tracking the marks. They led away from the crater, toward the north. Toward the city. Izuku took a step to follow, but his danger sense flared, a dull throb at the base of his skull. He froze. From the shadows of a twisted turbine engine, a figure emerged. It wasn't a hero. It wasn't a student. It was a Nomu. A near high-end. It was missing an arm, and its head was cracked, but it was alive. It sniffed the air, its exposed brain pulsating. It saw Izuku. It screeched, a sound like metal on glass, and charged. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't feel fear. He felt a cold, hollow void where his heart used to be. The Noma lunged, jaws snapping. Izuku stepped to the right. Minimal movement. He channeled the embers of his power into his left leg. St. Louis. Smash. He didn't scream it. He whispered it. His boot connected with the Noma's neck. There was a wet crunch. The creature was launched sideways, smashing into a steel beam with enough force to liquefy its spine. It slumped, twitching, then went still. Izuku stood over it, his breath steaming in the cold air. He looked at his hands. They were covered in dirt and dried blood. His costume was in tatters. The Zeta gauntlets were gone. He was alone. He looked toward the horizon, where the ruins of the city lay under the pall of smoke. "I'm coming," Izuku said to the silence. He began to walk. The boy who wanted to save everyone had died in the fall. The ghost who walked out of the crater had only one goal left: survive, and then hunt. The rain in the New Japan did not cleanse, it corroded. It fell in sheets of gray, slate-colored water, slick with the ash that had been suspended in the stratosphere for 3 months. It tasted of sulfur and dead fires. It hissed when it touched exposed metal, a constant, low-frequency static that had become the soundtrack of the apocalypse. In the ruins of what used to be the Saitama Prefecture, the silence was heavy. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a library or a sleeping forest. It was the silence of a grave. The birds had long since fled or died. The insects had burrowed deep. The only things that moved were the wind, the rain, and the things that hunted in the dark. Izuku Midoriya sat perched on the twisted iron skeleton of a collapsed transmission tower. He was motionless, a gargoyle carved from pain and vigilance. To anyone looking up from the ground, he would have been invisible, just another shadow in a world made of them. But up close, the sight was enough to break the heart of anyone who remembered the bright-eyed boy who once broke his bones to save a stranger. He was a patchwork of scavenged survival. His original hero costume, the suit Zeta, was a ruin. The green fabric was stained nearly black with grime and dried blood. The iron soles of his red boots were cracked, held together by industrial adhesive and friction tape. His right arm, the one that had shattered during the fall, was bound tight against his chest in a sling made from a material that looked suspiciously like the carbon fiber cables Best Jeanist used to wield. Wrapped around his neck and shoulders, billowing slightly in the toxic wind, was a yellow cape. It was torn, burned at the edges, and heavy with water. It had belonged to Gran Torino. Now, it was a shroud Izuku wore to remember the weight of the legacy that was slowly killing him. Around his neck, hidden within the folds of the cape, was a capture scarf. Eraserhead's binding cloth. Izuku had found a strip of it caught on a rebar 3 weeks after the crash. He didn't know if his teacher was alive. He wore the scarf like a talisman. Hunger. The sensation was a dull, gnawing ache in his stomach, but Izuku ignored it. He was good at ignoring things now. He ignored the phantom pains in his arms. He ignored the cold that seeped into his marrow. He ignored the silence in his head where the vestiges used to speak. Since the crash, the one-for-all quirk factor had gone dormant. It was still there. He could feel the stockpile of power like a reservoir behind a dam, but the voices were gone. The first user, Nana, All Might, they had retreated into the deepest recesses of the core, traumatized by the psychic backlash of a nation falling into despair. Only one voice remained. Contact, the voice clipped. It was sharp, militaristic. 200 meters. North-northwest. Engine vibrations consistent with heavy transport. It was the second user. The one who had fought all for one when the world was chaos the first time. He was the only one suited for this new dark age. Izuku didn't answer. He didn't speak anymore. Not since he realized that there was no one left to call for help. He adjusted his cowl, the metal mouthguard clicking into place. Green lightning, faint and flickering like a dying bulb, traced a line up his left leg. He didn't use 100%. He didn't use 40%. His body was too broken, his calorie intake too low. He operated at a constant, efficient 15%. He dropped from the tower. He didn't land with a crash. He used float to arrest his momentum inches from the ground, his boots touching the wet asphalt without a sound. He was a ghost. And tonight the ghost was hunting. The convoy consisted of 3 armored trucks. They were old JSDF vehicles, repainted with crude graffiti, skulls, crossed bones, and the symbol of the Paranormal Liberation Front. They rumbled down the cracked highway, headlights cutting through the thick fog. Inside the lead truck, a villain named Turok drove with one hand on the wheel and the other holding a half-eaten protein bar. His quirk, hardened skin, made him look like a rocky toad, his gray flesh glistening in the dashboard lights. "I hate this sector," Turok grumbled, chewing loudly. "It gives me the creeps. We should have taken the coastal route." In the passenger seat, a woman with snakes for hair, a heteromorph who went by the name Viper, scoffed. She was cleaning a submachine gun. "The coastal route is flooded, you idiot. Besides, Lord Shigaraki wants these medical supplies in the capital by tomorrow. We don't stop." "I heard stories," Turok said, glancing at the side mirrors. "About this area. The drifters say there's something out here. Not a Nomu. Something else. Drifters are meth heads and cowards," Viper spat. "There are no heroes left, Turok. Endeavor is dead. Hawks is dead. The kids from UA are splatter on the pavement. We won. Get that through your thick skull." "I know we won," Turok muttered. "But they say it's a ghost. A green ghost. They say it doesn't talk. It just breaks you." "Shut up and drive." The convoy rounded a bend where the highway passed under the ruins of an old suspension bridge. The fog here was thicker, an unnatural purple haze that seemed to cling to the tires. 6th user and smoke screen. Turok frowned, squinting. "Fog's getting thick." Suddenly, the truck's proximity sensors screamed. Thump. Something landed on the roof of the cab. It wasn't heavy, but the impact reverberated through the chassis. "What was that?" Viper snapped, raising her gun. Turok slammed on the brakes. "I hit something. Or something hit us." The truck skidded to a halt on the wet pavement. The 2 trucks behind them honked, confused. "Don't go out there," Viper warned, her snakes hissing in agitation. Turok ignored her. He was a villain. He had skin harder than concrete. He wasn't afraid of roadkill. He kicked the door open and stepped out into the purple fog. "Hey!" he shouted back to the other trucks. "Hold up." Checking the hull, he walked to the front of the truck. There was nothing there. No deer, no debris. He looked up at the roof. Nothing. "Weird," Turok muttered. He turned to get back in the truck. From the fog, a black tendril shot out. It moved with the speed of a striking cobra, wrapping around Turok's ankle. He didn't even have time to scream. He was yanked upward into the mist. There was a sickening crack, the sound of his hardened skin meeting something harder, and then silence. Inside the cab, Viper stared at the empty doorway. "Turok?" A body fell from the sky, slamming onto the hood of the truck. It was Turok. He was unconscious, his rocky armor shattered at the jawline, foaming at the mouth. "Ambush!" Viper screamed, kicking the door open and diving out, firing her gun blindly into the fog. "We're under attack." The rear trucks emptied. 12 villains, a mix of heteromorphs and emitter types, scrambled out, quirks flaring. Some ignited flames, others grew claws. "Show yourself!" One of them roared, a man with blades for fingers. "We serve the Demon King! You can't touch us!" The fog swirled. To their left, 2 yellow eyes glowed. The villains turned and fired. Fireballs, bullets, laser blasts tore through the mist. They hit nothing but air. Over there. No, he's behind us. Panic, the second user analyzed in Izuku's mind. Heart rates elevated. Formation breaking. They are shooting at shadows. Engage. Izuku moved. He didn't run. He utilized the physics breaking property of gearshift in its lowest setting. He removed his own inertia. He became weightless, frictionless. He glided through the chaos like smoke. He appeared behind the blade-fingered villain. Izuku didn't use a smash. A smash was loud. A smash wasted energy. He used the capture scarf. The binding cloth whipped around the villain's neck and wrists. With a sharp tug, Izuku used the villain's own momentum to slam him face first into the asphalt. Crack. One down. He's here! A villain shouted. Izuku was already gone. He appeared on the hood of the second truck. A villain with a laser quirk aimed at him. Danger sense. A sharp stab behind the eyes. Izuku tilted his head. The laser beam scorched the air where his ear had been a millisecond before. Izuku lunged. He didn't punch. He drove the palm of his hand into the villain's solar plexus, applying a precise, kinetic shockwave. The villain's eyes rolled back, and he folded like a lawn chair. 2 down. Kill him. Kill the brat. Viper saw him then. The lightning illuminated him for a second. The tattered green suit. The bunny ears of the cowl, one ripped off. The yellow cape dripping with rain. It's him, she whispered, terror seizing her throat. It's the Yue survivor. She raised her gun, but her hands were shaking. Izuku turned his head. The green lenses of his mask stared at her. There was no anger in that gaze. No righteousness. Just a cold, mathematical calculation of the most efficient way to end the fight. Black Whip, a rough, unused voice whispered. Black tendrils exploded from his back. They didn't just grab, they thrashed. They were an extension of his rage, kept on a tight leash. The tendrils snatched 3 villains at once, knocking their heads together with a sound like billiard balls. The remaining 6 villains broke. Their morale shattered. They dropped their weapons and ran into the darkness. Izuku didn't chase them. He didn't have the calories to waste on runaways. They would spread the fear. That was useful. He landed on the wet pavement, the black whips retracting into his skin. He stood amidst the groaning bodies of the defeated. He checked the area. Safe. He walked to the back of the lead truck and ripped the lock off with a pinch of his fingers. Inside, crates were stacked high. Food. Clean water. Antibiotics. Painkillers. Izuku let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. His shoulders sagged. The monster vanished, replaced by a tired, broken boy. He grabbed a crate of medicine and a bag of rice. He couldn't carry it all. He would have to come back, or signal the others. But first, the antibiotics. He closed the truck, marked it with a scratch on the metal so he could find it later, and vanished back into the fog. The hideout was located beneath the ruins of a collapsed shopping mall in what used to be a suburb of Tokyo. The underground parking garage had survived the tectonic shifts of the crash, creating a damp, concrete cavern that smelled of mildew and unwashed bodies. It was here that the kingdom of dust had not yet reached. Izuku slipped through the ventilation shaft, moving the heavy grate with his good arm. He dropped into the maintenance hallway and limped toward the flicker of a fire. There were only 8 of them, survivors he had picked up over the last 3 months. People the villains deemed useless. The elderly. The sick. The quirkless. He's back. The whisper went through the small group. Kenji, an old man who had once been a salaryman, hobbled forward. He was missing a leg from the waist down, leaning on a rusted pipe. Ghost-san, Kenji said, bowing low. You returned. Izuku nodded. He lowered the crate of supplies gently to the floor. A woman named Yumi, who had been a nurse before the world ended, rushed over. She opened the crate and gasped. Amoxicillin, she breathed, tears welling in her eyes. And bandages. Real bandages. She looked at Izuku. You saved him. Little Toshi, the infection was spreading. This will save his leg. Izuku looked past her to the corner of the room. A 7-year-old boy, Toshi, lay on a pile of dirty blankets, his face flushed with fever. His leg was wrapped in dirty rags. Izuku walked over. He knelt beside the boy. Toshi opened his eyes. They were glassy. Mr. Hero? Izuku flinched. He hated that word. He wasn't a hero. Heroes saved the day. Heroes won. Izuku was just a janitor cleaning up the mess he failed to prevent. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a small, full-wrapped object. A chocolate bar he had found in the truck. It was melted and rehardened, but it was calories. He handed it to the boy. Toshi's eyes widened. He grabbed it with weak fingers. Chocolate? Izuku nodded. He reached out and patted the boy's head. His glove was rough, but his touch was gentle. You need to eat too, Yumi said softly, coming up behind him with a bowl of watery rice gruel. You look thinner every time you come back. Izuku stood up. He shook his head. He pointed at the crate, then at the group. For you. Please, Kenji pleaded. If you fall, who protects us? Eat. Izuku hesitated. His stomach roared. The vestige of the second user remained silent, but the biological imperative was screaming. He took the bowl. He sat slightly apart from them, in the shadows, and lifted the mask just enough to expose his mouth. He ate quickly, efficiently, tasting nothing. As he ate, he listened to them talk. They say Shigaraki is building a tower, Kenji whispered to Yumi. In the center of Tokyo. Out of the bones of the old skyscrapers. Don't say his name, Yumi hissed. It attracts bad luck. I heard the foreign heroes aren't coming. Another survivor, a teenager with a mutation that gave him bad ears, murmured. The American fleet turned back. They say a massive storm barrier surrounds Japan. We're quarantined. Like a plague. Izuku stopped eating. Quarantined. Abandoned. He knew why. It wasn't just a storm. It was fear. The world had seen One for All fail. They had seen the symbol of peace's successor fall from the sky. If the strongest power in existence couldn't stop Shigaraki, what could an army do? They were afraid that if they sent heroes, Shigaraki would take their quirks too. Containment was the only strategy left. Izuku clenched his fist. The ceramic bowl cracked in his hand. The survivors jumped. Izuku stood up, setting the broken bowl down. He walked to the edge of the firelight, staring at the concrete wall. He needed to meditate. He needed to try and reach the first again. He sat cross-legged, closing his eyes. The vestige world. It was no longer a realm of golden light and flowing aurora. It was a ruin. Izuku stood in a void of fractured glass. The ground was made of shards of memories. He saw reflections of All Might smiling, of Yue standing tall, of his mother crying. The throne of One for All was cracked down the middle. First? Izuku called out. Nana? Mist swirled. A figure emerged. It was Yoichi, the first user. But he looked transparent, fading. He looked like a ghost of a ghost. Ninth, Yoichi's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. Why won't the others speak to me? Izuku asked, his mental voice shaking. I need them. I don't know what to do. They are mourning, Yoichi said sadly. The link between us and the world is empathetic. When Yue fell, the despair of your classmates, the terror of the civilians, it flooded the core. It nearly shattered the quirk. Izuku looked down. It was my fault. I wasn't strong enough. No, Yoichi said firmly. You held the sky, Izuku. You did the impossible. But the impossible takes a toll. I can't beat him, Izuku whispered. Shigaraki. He's too strong. And now he has All for One completely. And I'm broken. Yoichi floated closer. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. It felt cold. You are alive. That is the variable he did not calculate. He thinks you are dust. He thinks One for All died with you. That is your weapon. What weapon? Izuku laughed bitterly. I'm hiding in a sewer. The element of surprise, Yoichi said. But be warned. The more you use the power, the more he will sense it. He is scanning the country with search. He is looking for the light. That is why I keep you at 15%, the second user's voice cut in. Kudo appeared, his face stern, his arms crossed. Any higher, and you light up like a flare on his radar. So I just hide? Izuku asked. No, Kudo said. You prepare. You are not a symbol anymore, Midoriya. You are an insurgent. You strike, you vanish. You chip away at his foundation until it crumbles. But first, Yoichi said, his eyes sad. You must heal your heart. You are carrying too much guilt. It is poisoning the quirk. My friends are dead, Izuku said, his voice flat. Because of me, are they? Kudo asked. Izuku looked up. What? We felt the deaths of many, Kudo said. But not all. The bond you shared with the explosive one, and the half-cold one, those threads are not severed. They are frayed. Silent. But not severed. Izuku's heart slammed against his ribs. Kaken? Todoroki? They're alive? Unknown, Kudo said. But the possibility exists. The vision began to destabilize. The world shook. Wake up, Kudo commanded. Intruder. Izuku's eyes snapped open. He was back in the garage. The fire was dying. The battered teenager, Koji, was standing over him, shaking. Ghost-san, Koji whispered. Someone is at the barricade. They aren't attacking. They're asking for you. Izuku was on his feet instantly. He grabbed his cowl and pulled it on. He moved to the entrance of the hideout, where a heavy steel shutter was lowered, leaving only a small gap at the bottom. Outside, in the rain, a figure stood. It wasn't a villain. It was a small, hunchbacked man in a trench coat. He held a white flag, a dirty rag on a stick. Izuku stepped out, the capture scarf floating menacingly around him. The man flinched, raising his hands. Don't kill me. I'm not with the League. I'm a broker. An information broker. Izuku stared at him. He didn't speak. He just let the glowing green eyes of his mask do the talking. You're the green ghost, right? The man stammered. The one hitting the convoys? Look, I have info. Free of charge. Consider it a donation to the cause. Izuku tilted his head. Why? Because they killed my brother, the broker spat, his fear momentarily replaced by hate. Those PLF bastards. The broker reached into his coat. Izuku tensed, black whip ready to strike, but the man only pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He placed it on the wet ground and backed away. They're planning a public execution, the broker said. In 2 days. In the ruins of Muzudafu. At the old train station, Izuku felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. They say they caught a big fish, the broker continued. A UA survivor. They want to make an example of him. To show the people that hope is truly dead. Izuku stepped forward, his boots splashing in the puddle. He looked down at the paper. It was a printed flyer. Propaganda. It showed a grainy image of a prisoner chained to a concrete block. The prisoner was battered, bleeding, and missing an eye. His red hair was matted and grown out, but the jagged, hardening scars on his skin were unmistakable. Eijiro Kirishima. Red Riot. Izuku's breath hitched. A sound escaped him, a strangled, desperate gasp. They're going to kill him at noon, the broker said, turning to leave. If you are who I think you are, don't let them. The broker ran into the night. Izuku fell to his knees in the mud. He picked up the flyer. His hand trembled so violently the paper tore. Kirishima was alive. Alive. But for how long? Muzudafu, Izuku thought. Home. The vestiges stirred. The anger returned. But this time, it wasn't the cold, hollow void. It was a fire. A white-hot furnace of determination. He stood up. The mud slicked off his cape. He turned back to the hideout. Kenji and Yumi were watching him from the doorway, fear in their eyes. They had heard. You're leaving, Yumi said softly. It wasn't a question. Izuku nodded. He reached into his pouch and pulled out the rest of the supplies, the food, the water tablets. He left them everything he had. He walked over to the wall and used a piece of charred wood to write on the concrete. Stay hidden. I will draw them away. He looked at them one last time. He wanted to promise he would come back. But he couldn't lie. He turned and walked into the rain. Muzudafu was 30 miles away. He had 2 days. He didn't care about the energy conservation anymore. Gearshift, second gear. Izuku blurred. The sonic boom cracked the silence of the night, shattering windows in the ruined mall above. For the first time in 3 months, the ghost was not haunting. He was charging. The road to Muzudafu was a graveyard of memories. Izuku Midoriya moved along the fractured spine of the highway, a solitary streak of green lightning in a world painted in shades of gray. He ran with a limp that he compensated for with bursts of black whip, pulling himself forward, turning his run into a jagged, low-altitude flight. He was moving fast, too fast for his injured body, but he couldn't slow down. The flyer he had found in the rain-slicked mud of the hideout burned a hole in his pocket. Execution. Noon. The sun was trying to break through the smog layer, casting a sickly, bruised light over the landscape. It was late morning. He had less than an hour. As he ran, the landscape began to shift from the anonymous ruin of the countryside to the specific, agonizing geography of his childhood. He passed the twisted remains of a bridge he and his mother used to drive over to get to the mall. He passed the skeletal frame of a billboard that once displayed All Might's smiling face. Now it was stripped bare, the steel ribs whistling in the wind. And then, the ghosts came. They didn't come as spirits or apparitions. They came as glitches in his processing speed, fractures in his exhausted mind. He blinked, and for a second, the rubble to his left wasn't rubble. It was Tenya Ida, running alongside him. The phantom Ida was gesturing rigidly, his engines roaring. Midoriya-kun! Your form is sloppy. A hero must maintain posture even in crisis. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head violently. Stop it, he rasped. He opened his eyes. Ida was gone. Just a twisted guardrail. He leaped over a crater in the road. Ribbit. Tsuya Ajiri was crouching on the edge of the hole, her large eyes staring at him. She looked sad. She was wet, but not from rain. She was covered in the black sludge of the crash site. Are we there yet, Midoriya-chan? I'm trying, Izuku whispered to the empty air. I'm trying, Tsu. The hallucination dissolved into seafoam. These weren't just tricks of the light. They were the manifestations of the guilt that ate at his stomach lining, more acidic than any villain's poison. It was the guilt born from the first week, the week of the shovel. Flashback. 2 weeks after the fall. The crater was still hot. The fires deep underground hadn't gone out yet. The air smelled of sulfur and cooked meat. Izuku had been digging for 4 days straight. His hands were raw, the gloves long since torn away. He was using a piece of rebar as a lever, trying to pry up a massive slab of the UA dormitory block, Heights Alliance. The structure had been pulverized, compressed into a pancake of concrete and steel. Is anyone there? Izuku screamed, his voice hoarse. Please! Make a sound! Silence. He pushed the rebar. One for all flickered weakly. He was starving, dehydrated, delirious. The slab shifted with a groan. Light filtered into the cavity below. Izuku scrambled down, sliding on loose gravel. Hello? It's Deku. I'm here. He found them in what used to be the common area kitchen. The space had been preserved by a structural beam that had fallen diagonally, creating a small, triangular pocket of air. Mashireo Ojiro was there. The martial artist was sitting against the wall. He looked peaceful. There was a large gash on his head, but his eyes were closed. His tail was wrapped around himself, like a blanket. Ojiro-kun? Izuku whispered, reaching out. He touched Ojiro's shoulder. The body was stiff. Cold. He had suffocated. The air pocket hadn't been big enough for how long it took Izuku to wake up from his coma. If Izuku had woken up a day earlier, if he had dug faster. No, Izuku whimpered. No, no, no. He looked further into the shadows. Rikido Sato was there too. Sugarman. The strongest physical fighter in the class after Izuku, Sato was face down. He had died holding the ceiling up. His arms were locked above his head, his muscles turned to stone by rigor mortis. He had clearly held the weight of the collapsing roof for as long as he could, trying to buy Ojiro time. His back was broken. Izuku stared at them. His friends. They weren't moving. They weren't breathing. They were just meat. Something broke inside Izuku that day. A scream built up in his chest, so loud and so violent that he thought it would tear his throat out. But it didn't come out. It couldn't. It got stuck, lodging itself in his heart like a shard of glass. He had sat there, in the dark, between the corpse of the boy with the tail and the boy who loved baking, and he had simply stopped being Izuku Midoriya. He covered them. He couldn't bury them. The ground was too hard, and he was too weak. He covered them with debris, creating a cairn. He took Ojiro's belt. He took a small pouch of sugar from Sato's pocket. He left the grave, and he never looked back. Present day. Izuku slammed back into reality as his boots hit the pavement of the Muzutafu's city limits. The city was a husk. Muzutafu had been a quiet, suburban city. Now, it was a fortress of misery. The villains had erected barricades made of cars and rubble at the main intersections. The windows of the apartment buildings were boarded up or shattered. Banners hung from the lampposts. They bore the symbol of the Paranormal Liberation Front, but crudely drawn, as if by children or madmen. There, his danger sense didn't flare, but his intuition did. The old train station. The central plaza. He could hear the noise. A crowd. Shouting. The distinct, amplified distortion of a microphone. Izuku slowed down. He couldn't just charge in blindly. He needed to assess. He scaled the side of a derelict office building, his fingers digging into the brickwork. He pulled himself up to the roof and looked down. The plaza was packed. But it wasn't a willing crowd. Hundreds of civilians were corralled into the square, surrounded by armed villains. The civilians looked emaciated, terrified. They were the audience for the day's entertainment. In the center of the plaza, a makeshift stage had been built atop the crushed remains of a commuter train, and there, chained to a vertical steel beam, was Eijiro Kirishima. Izuku's breath hitched. The flyer hadn't done the damage justice. Kirishima was stripped to the waist. His chest, usually so proud, so unbreakable, was a map of torture. There were deep gouges where his hardening had been forcibly cracked and chiseled away. Burn marks, lacerations. His face was swollen. His left eye was gone, the socket covered by a dirty rag that had been tied around his head. His signature spiky red hair was long, matted with blood, hanging limply over his face. But he was standing. Despite the chains, despite the blood, Red Riot was standing on his own 2 feet. He wasn't slumping. His chin was up. Look at him! A voice boomed over the speakers. A villain walked onto the stage. He was massive, his body composed of shifting, molten slag and scrap metal. He radiated heat. Steam hissed from his shoulders. This was Slag, a lieutenant in the new regime. This is what remains of your hero's society. Slag roared, gesturing to Kirishima. This is UA's finest. The unbreakable Red Riot. Slag walked up to Kirishima and backhanded him across the face. The sound was like a hammer hitting stone. Kirishima's head snapped to the side. A fresh trickle of blood ran down his chin. The crowd flinched. Some looked away. Unbreakable? Slag mocked. Everything breaks. It just takes the right amount of pressure. Slag's hand turned white-hot. He grabbed Kirishima's shoulder. Kirishima didn't scream. His jaw clenched, his neck muscles straining, but he refused to give them the satisfaction. Smoke rose from his flesh. Any last words, hero? Slag sneered, pulling his burning hand away. Kirishima spat a glob of blood onto Slag's molten chest. It sizzled instantly. Kirishima raised his head. His one good eye, red and fierce, scanned the crowd. He wasn't looking for help. He was looking at the civilians. He was trying to comfort them. Don't give up, Kirishima rasped. His voice was broken, sounding like gravel in a blender. Stand up, Slag laughed. Pathetic. He turned to the crowd. Today, we finish this. We extinguish the last ember. And then, Muzutafu belongs to the dust. Slag raised his other arm. The metal transformed, shaping into a massive, spiked executioner's axe. Goodbye, Riot. Up on the roof, Izuku Midoriya felt the lock on his heart click open. The 15% limit? Screw it. The stealth? Forget it. The vestiges screamed in unison. Save him. Izuku stepped off the ledge. Gravity took hold, but only for a second. Gearshift, overdrive. The air pressure dropped. A sonic boom shattered every remaining window in the plaza before Izuku even touched the ground. Slag brought the axe down. It never connected. A blur of green and black collided with the execution stage. The impact was like a meteor strike. The train car underneath them buckled, the metal shrieking as it folded in on itself. Dust and debris exploded outward, blinding the front row of the crowd and knocking the surrounding villains off their feet. Silence fell over the plaza. The dust slowly began to clear. Standing in the center of the crater on the stage, crouched low, was a figure. One hand, covered in a tattered, blood-stained glove, was holding the blade of Slag's molten axe. The metal was cool where he touched it, the heat seemingly absorbed or negated. Who? Slag stammered, his eyes widening. He tried to pull his arm back, but it wouldn't move. It was like he was anchored to a mountain. The figure looked up. The bunny-eared cowl was battered. One ear was missing. The mouthguard was cracked, revealing gritted teeth. But the eyes, green light poured from the lenses, leaving trails in the air like burning phosphorus. You, Izuku whispered. His voice was low, terrifyingly calm. Get away from him. It's the ghost. A villain in the crowd screamed. The green ghost, Slag snarled, recovering his bravado. Ghost? You're just a brat. A leftover. Slag used his free hand to launch a stream of molten metal at Izuku's face. Izuku didn't dodge. Black whip. 6 tendrils exploded from Izuku's back. They moved faster than the molten metal. 2 of them slapped the attack aside, splashing liquid fire harmlessly onto the wreckage. The other 4 wrapped around Slag. Smash, Izuku said. He didn't wind up. He didn't yell. He just twisted his hips and pulled. Slag was ripped off his feet. Izuku spun him around, using the villain as a wrecking ball, and slammed him into the cluster of villains guarding the stage. Crunch. The impact sent bodies flying. Izuku turned to Kirishima. The redhead was staring at him with his one eye wide open. He looked confused, like he was seeing an angel or a demon and couldn't decide which. Deku? Kirishima whispered. Izuku reached out. He grabbed the heavy steel chains binding Kirishima. He didn't look for a key. He squeezed. One for all surged into his grip. The steel groaned, deformed, and then snapped like dry pasta. Kirishima slumped forward. Izuku caught him. I've got you, Izuku said, his voice trembling now. I've got you, Aijiro. Kill them! Slag roared, climbing out of the rubble. He was bleeding magma, half his face caved in, but he was furious. Kill them both. Open fire! There were 50 villains in the plaza. They all raised their weapons. Guns, quark-generated projectiles, energy blasts. Izuku looked at Kirishima. Can you stand? Kirishima gritted his teeth. His skin hardened, turning jagged and rock-like. I can stand. Good, Izuku said. He turned to face the army. Close your eye. Why? Because I'm not holding back. Izuku took a deep breath. He felt the reservoir of power. He felt the second user grinning. He felt the anger of the fourth. He stomped his foot. Manchester Smash. Air Force. He didn't aim at the villains. He aimed at the ground in front of them. The shockwave was directional. It ripped up the cobblestones of the plaza, turning the street into a wave of shrapnel. A wall of compressed air and debris slammed into the villains, knocking them back like bowling pins. The crowd of civilians screamed and ducked. Run! Izuku yelled at the civilians. Get out of here! They didn't need to be told twice. The crowd scattered, creating chaos that the villains couldn't shoot through. After them! Slag screamed. Izuku grabbed Kirishima around the waist. We're leaving. Wait! Kirishima protested, though he was barely staying conscious. The people, they're running. If we stay, the villains focus on the crowd to get to us. If we run, they follow us. Izuku activated float. He activated gearshift. He launched them into the air, clearing the rooftops in a single bound. They landed 3 miles away, in the industrial district. Izuku found an abandoned warehouse that had partially collapsed, offering plenty of cover. He set Kirishima down against a concrete pillar. The adrenaline was fading. The pain was returning. Izuku's arm throbbed where the bone had knitted improperly months ago. He knelt beside Kirishima. Let me see the wounds. Kirishima was panting heavily. He deactivated his hardening. The wounds looked worse without the rock armor. He was pale, sweating profusely. You're alive, Kirishima breathed, staring at Izuku. Midoriya, holy crap. You're alive. Izuku pulled down his cowl. His face was gaunt, covered in grime and patchy stubble. His eyes had dark circles so deep they looked like bruises. Yeah, Izuku said softly. I'm alive. He began to dress Kirishima's wounds with the limited supplies he had in his belt pouches. He wrapped the chest injuries tight. I saw you fall, Kirishima said, his voice hitching. We all saw it. The fortress, it broke. And you were in the middle of it. I survived, Izuku said curtly. He didn't want to talk about the fall. Kirishima, your eye? Kirishima reached up and touched the rag over his missing eye. He let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Yeah. Caught a piece of shrapnel during the crash? Or maybe a villain took it later. I don't really remember the first week. It's manly, right? Like a pirate. His voice cracked on the last word. Izuku finished the bandage. He sat back, leaning against a crate opposite Kirishima. The silence between them was heavy. It was filled with the things they weren't saying. Kirishima looked at his hands. I thought I was the last one. Izuku looked up. What? I thought I was the last one from 1A, Kirishima whispered. Tears began to leak from his single eye, cutting clean tracks through the dirt on his face. After the crash, I woke up in the rubble. I found Kaminari. Izuku froze. Denki? Kirishima nodded. He swallowed hard. He was gone, Midoriya. He shielded Jiro. She was alive when I found her, but the villains came. They swarmed the crash site like locusts. I tried to fight them off. I tried to harden, to be the wall, but there were too many. Kirishima slammed his fist into the concrete floor. They took them. They took Jiro. They took Mina. I saw them drag them away. Alive? Izuku asked, his intensity returning. I think so, Kirishima said. But that was 3 months ago. In the camps, I heard screams. I don't know who is left. Kirishima looked up at Izuku, his expression desperate. He asked the question Izuku had been dreading. The question that had haunted every nightmare. Midoriya, where is Bakugo? Izuku flinched. He looked away, staring at the dust motes dancing in the shaft of light coming from the roof. I don't know, Izuku whispered. You were with him, Kirishima pressed. In the sky. You two were fighting Shigaraki together. The floor broke, Izuku said, his voice devoid of emotion. He fell. I tried to catch him with Black Whip, but there was too much debris. I lost visual. And Todoroki? I don't know. Kirishima slumped back. Damn it. Damn it all. He covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. The unbreakable red riot was breaking. Izuku watched him. He wanted to cry too. He wanted to mourn Kaminari. He wanted to scream about Bakugo. But he couldn't. If he started crying, he wasn't sure he would ever stop. And if he stopped moving, he died. We can't stay here, Izuku said. Slag will have trackers. We need to move. Kirishima wiped his face. He sniffed, wiping his nose on his wrist. Where? There's nowhere to go. The heroes are gone, man. It's just dust. No, Izuku said. He stood up. He looked taller now, despite the slouch. There is a place. I have a hideout. And there are others. Kirishima's head snapped up. Others? Momo, Izuku said. Tsuyu. Shinso. They're alive. They're waiting. A light flickered in Kirishima's eye. It wasn't happiness, exactly. It was relief. Deep, soulful relief. Yaoyorozu is alive? Kirishima breathed. Thank God. Thank God. He tried to stand up, but his legs wobbled. Izuku stepped forward and offered his shoulder. Kirishima grabbed it. He gripped Izuku's hero suit, the suit his mother made, the suit Hatsum upgraded, and he held on like it was a lifeline. You look like hell, Midoriya, Kirishima said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. You don't look so great yourself, Izuku replied. We failed, didn't we? Kirishima asked as they began to limp toward the exit. We lost the war. Izuku looked out at the ruined skyline of Mizutafu. He thought of the bodies in the crater. He thought of Shigaraki sitting on a throne of dust. Yeah, Izuku said. We lost the war. He tightened his grip on Kirishima. But we haven't lost the fight. Later that evening, they moved through the sewers to avoid patrols. It was slow going. Kirishima was weak, running on fumes and willpower. By the time they reached the outskirts of the safe zone, the underground bunker beneath the old Yakuza hideout that Momo had secured, it was nightfall. They stopped at the heavy blast door. Izuku knocked. A rhythmic pattern. 3 taps. 1 tap. 2 taps. The peephole slid open. Shinso's tired purple eyes peered out. They widened when he saw Kirishima. The bolts unlocked. The door swung open. Momo Yaoyorozu was standing there. She looked different. Her hair was cut short, practical. She wore tactical gear scavenged from fallen SWAT teams. She looked harder, like a general who had been forced to send too many soldiers to their deaths. But when she saw Kirishima, the general vanished. The high school girl returned. Kirishima-kun! She didn't care about the blood or the grime. She ran forward and embraced him. Kirishima fell into her arms, finally letting his legs give out. Tsuyu was there a second later, hugging them both, croaking softly in relief. Izuku stood back. He stayed in the doorway, watching them. He felt a pang of intense loneliness. He was part of them, but he was also apart from them. They were survivors. He was the reason they had to survive. He turned to close the door. Deku-chan. Tsuyu was looking at him. She released Kirishima and hopped over. She placed a hand on Izuku's arm. You found him, she said softly. You actually brought him back. He's hurt, Izuku said, deflecting. He needs medical attention. Does the infirmary still have supplies? We have enough, Momo said, wiping her eyes. She looked at Izuku with a mixture of gratitude and worry. You should rest too, Midoriya-san. You've been running for 2 days. I can't, Izuku said. Why not? Kirishima asked from the floor, leaning against Shinso. Take a break, man. We're safe here for now. Izuku shook his head. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled flyer of the execution. He smoothed it out on the table. Kirishima said something, Izuku said. About the prisoners. About Jiro and Ishido being dragged away. The room went silent. If they are alive, Izuku said, his voice dropping an octave, then they are being held somewhere. And if they are being held, he looked at the map on the wall. The map of Japan, with huge swathes crossed out in red ink. I'm going to find them, Izuku vowed. We, Kirishima corrected. He struggled to sit up straighter. We are going to find them. Momo sighed, but she nodded. She walked over to the table and pointed to a location near the ruins of Tokyo Tower. We have intel, Momo said, her voice shifting back to command mode. Radio intercepts. They talk about a trophy room in the capital. If they have prisoners, high-value prisoners, that's where they'll be. The capital, Izuku muttered. Shigaraki's backyard. It's a fortress, Shinso warned. Tartarus was a joke compared to what they built there. I don't care, Izuku said. He looked at his friends. Battered, broken, missing eyes, missing limbs, missing innocence. But they were here. We need to send a signal, Momo said suddenly. If we're going to do this, we can't do it alone. We need help. We need the world to know we're still fighting. The calm tower, Shinso said. On top of the Tartarus ruins, Izuku nodded. Then that's the next mission. He walked over to a corner of the room and sat down, pulling his knees to his chest. He finally allowed himself to close his eyes. For the first time in months, when he closed his eyes, he didn't see Ojiro and Sato dead in the dark. He saw Kirishima standing in the light. It wasn't much. But it was enough to sleep. The bunker smelled of stale air, ozone, and the metallic tang of dried blood. It was a scent that Izuku Midoriya had become intimately familiar with over the last 90 days. It was the scent of survival. He sat in the corner of what had once been a Yakuza meeting room, now converted into a makeshift command center. The concrete walls were damp, sweating with condensation. The only light came from a few battery-powered lanterns and the blue glow of a holographic map projector that Momo Yaoyorozu had constructed from scavenged drone parts. Izuku watched her. Momo looked older. Much older than 17. Her hair, once long and pristine, was chopped into a jagged, utilitarian bob that barely brushed her chin. There were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of sleep could erase, and her frame was thinner. The lipid reserves required for her creation quirk were harder to maintain on a diet of ration bars and canned rice. She was tracing a line on the map with a gloved finger. The perimeter patrols have tightened, Momo said, her voice raspy. Since the execution in Muzudafu was disrupted, the Paranormal Liberation Front has doubled the guard around the capital. Opposite her, Hitoshi Shinso leaned against the wall. He wore a heavy trench coat over a mishmash of tactical gear. The binding cloth around his neck was not Aizawa's. Izuku had that, but a synthetic replica Momo had made. "They're spooked," Shinso said. "The green ghost made a scene. Slag is dead. That sends a message. It sends a message that we're still here," Tsuyu Azuri added. She sat on a crate, her legs pulled up to her chest. She was wrapping a fresh bandage around her ankle. Her usually wide, inquisitive eyes were narrowed, constantly scanning the room for threats that weren't there. "But it also tells them where to look." Izuku remained silent. He was cleaning the lenses of his cowl with a scrap of cloth. His hands moved with mechanical precision. "Midoriya-san," Momo said, turning to him. Izuku looked up. The green eyes of his mask were on the table, staring blindly at the ceiling. His real eyes were dull, the spark of fanaticism that used to define him buried under layers of trauma. "Yeah? We need to talk about the plan," she said. "The real plan. Not just hitting convoys. Not just surviving." Izuku placed the cowl down. "I'm listening." Kirishima was asleep on a cot in the adjacent room, pumped full of antibiotics and painkillers. His breathing was ragged, audible even through the thick walls. The sound was a rhythmic reminder of why they were doing this. Momo tapped the center of the map. A red circle pulsed over the ruins of the Bay Area. "The world thinks we're dead," Momo began. "Or worse, they think we're infectious." Izuku frowned. "Infectious?" "The decay," Momo explained. "When Shigaraki touched the ground, the wave didn't just destroy matter. It released a massive amount of quirk factor radiation. The dust, it's not just dust. It carries the signature of All for One." She brought up a new image. It showed satellite data, grainy, stolen footage. The United Nations declared Japan a no-man's land 2 weeks after the fall. The U.S. 7th Fleet established a blockade line 300 miles off the coast. They aren't letting anyone out, and they aren't letting anyone in. Izuku felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "They abandoned us." "They contained the threat," Shinso corrected, his voice cynical. "They're terrified that if Shigaraki gets out, he'll do to New York or London what he did to Muzurifu. They're waiting for us to kill each other off." "We can't win a war of attrition," Tsuyu said softly. "We don't have the food. We don't have the numbers. Shigaraki has the factories. He has the cloning vats. He can make more Nomus. We can't make more heroes." Momo nodded. "Exactly. Which is why we need to change the variables. We need to force the world to look at us. Not as a quarantine zone, but as a war zone where the good guys are still fighting." She pointed to a location on the map marked with a star. "The Tartarus Relay." Izuku leaned forward. "Tartarus was destroyed. The prison was destroyed," Momo corrected. "But the communication infrastructure beneath it was hardened against nuclear strikes. The villains have built a new tower on top of the ruins to coordinate their forces across the country. It's a localized intranet. But the transmitter dish, it has the range to hit the satellites. You want to hijack their radio," Izuku surmised. "I want to hijack their broadcast," Momo said, her eyes flashing with a glimpse of her old fire. "I want to send a message on every frequency, unencrypted. A distress signal. Proof of life. If we can show the world that civilians are alive, that students are fighting, the political pressure will force the UN to act. They can ignore a dead country. They can't ignore a dying one." "It's a suicide mission," Shinso said flatly. "Tartarus is the heart of the beast. It's surrounded by the Dustlands. High-end Nomus patrol the perimeter. And that's before you get to the tower itself." "I know," Momo said. She looked at Izuku. "That's why we couldn't do it before. We didn't have the firepower to break the line." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. They didn't have the firepower. But they had the ghost. Izuku looked at the map. He looked at the jagged coastline, the red zones, the black zones. He thought about Kirishima's missing eye. He thought about Ochako, potentially rotting in a cell in Tokyo. "How do we get in?" Izuku asked. Momo let out a breath she had been holding. "There's a maintenance tunnel. It feeds into the old cooling systems of the prison. It's flooded, but Tsu can guide us. Once we're inside, Shinso handles the security personnel. I rig the transmitter." "And me?" Izuku asked. You're the distraction, Momo said. And the battering ram. The tower is shielded by a kinetic barrier, a quirk-based shield generator stolen from an island. We can't sneak through it. You have to break it. Izuku looked at his hands. They were scarred, the skin rough. If I use 100%, Izuku whispered, Shigaraki will know. The room went silent. This was the elephant in the room. The reason Izuku had been hiding in the fog for 3 months. Using one for all at full power was like lighting a flare in a dark room. It told the predator exactly where the prey was. He'll come, Izuku said. If I break that barrier, he will come. We know, Momo said softly. That's why we have an extraction plan. Once the signal is sent, we scatter. We disappear back into the underground before he can arrive. It's risky, Shinso said. Staying here and starving to death is risky, Tsuyu countered. Izuku stood up. He walked to the corner where his tattered yellow cape hung drying on a pipe. He ran his thumb over the fabric. Gran Torino was gone. All Might was gone. The symbols were dust. But the signal. We do it, Izuku said. The Badlands. The journey to the Tartarus ruins took 2 days on foot. They moved at night, sticking to the shadows of the collapsed highways and the dense, mutated forests that had sprung up where the decay had failed to take hold. The landscape of Japan had changed. It wasn't just ruined, it was wrong. The sky was a perpetual bruised purple, the sun struggling to pierce the layer of atmospheric ash. The plants were gray and thorny, feeding on the tainted soil. Izuku took point. He didn't walk, he flowed. He used Black Whip to swing from the underside of overpasses, his feet barely touching the ground. Danger sense was a constant, low-level buzz at the base of his skull, a warning that the world itself was hostile. Behind him, the team moved in a tight formation. Shinso carried a modified assault rifle, rubber bullets, mostly, but he had a few magazines of live rounds for the Nomus. Momo carried a collapsible staff and a heavy pack filled with the components she would need for the tower. Tsuyu acted as the rear guard, her camouflage ability allowing her to blend perfectly with the gray sludge of the environment. They didn't speak. Silence was survival. On the second night, they reached the edge of the dust lands. This was the kill zone. A 5-mile radius around the Tartarus site where Shigaraki's initial decay wave had been most potent. There were no buildings here. No trees. Just a flat, gray desert of pulverized matter that shifted like sand dunes. In the center, rising like a black needle against the purple sky, was the tower. It was a monstrosity of architecture, a spire of twisted black metal, welded together from the scraps of the prison and the surrounding city. Red lights blinked rhythmically at its summit. There it is, Shinso whispered, lowering his binoculars. The devil's toothpick. Momo knelt in the ash, checking her Geiger counter. Radiation levels are high, but manageable for a few hours. The barrier is active. Izuku squinted. He could see a faint shimmer in the air around the base of the tower. A hexagonal lattice of hard light energy. That's the island tech, Izuku muttered. Shield generator type 4. It can withstand a cruise missile. Can it withstand a smash? Shinso asked. Izuku flexed his right hand. The scars felt tight. We'll find out. Wait, Tsuya hissed. Look! At the base. Izuku focused his eyes. Quirk zoom. A minor utility quirk he had unlocked recently, barely worth mentioning compared to the others, but useful. At the base of the tower, patrolling in a loose circle, were 3 figures. They were massive. Hulking shapes with exposed brains and elongated limbs. Hyans, Izuku said, his voice cold. 3 of them, Momo noted, her voice trembling slightly. We can't fight 3 Hyans and secure the tower. You don't have to, Izuku said. He stood up, the wind whipping Gran Torino's cape around his legs. I'll draw them out. You guys head for the drainage tunnel. Once I engage them, the perimeter will be chaotic. That's your window, Izuku, Tsuyu said, grabbing his wrist. 3 Hyans. Alone? Izuku looked at her. He pulled his cowl up, the metal mouthguard locking into place with a click. I'm not alone, he said, tapping his chest where the vestiges slept. Go. The distraction. Izuku didn't sneak. He launched. Gear shift, 3rd gear. He exploded from the ridge, a green comet streaking across the gray desert. The sound barrier broke with a crack that sounded like artillery fire. The 3 Hyans turned instantly. They were varied nightmares. One was winged, like a pterodactyl made of muscle and bone. Another was quadrupedal, built like a tank with a hammerhead skull. The third was tall, lanky, with whips for arms. Here! The winged one screeched. Izuku hit the winged one first. He didn't use a punch. He used the momentum of his flight. He spun in the air, Black Whip forming a massive, hardened coil around his leg. Manchester smash! He slammed his heel into the creature's chest. The impact was thunderous. The high end was spiked into the ash, creating a crater 10 meters wide. Dust plumed upward, creating a smoke screen. The other two roared and charged. Danger Sense screamed. Izuku ducked. The lanky Noma's whip arm slashed through the space where his head had been, shearing the top off a dune. Izuku rolled, coming up in a crouch. He fired a blast of air pressure from his fingers, Delaware smash, hitting the tank Nomu in the eyes. The creature stumbled, roaring in annoyance rather than pain. Over here! Izuku shouted, his voice amplified by the suit. Come get me, you ugly bastards! He engaged Float, taking to the air. He needed to pull them away from the tower base. Away from the tunnel entrance where Momo and the others were sneaking in. The winged Nomu recovered, shaking off the dust. It launched itself at him, faster than a jet. Fast. It's faster than me in the air. Izuku engaged gear shift again. Low gear. He killed his own momentum instantly, stopping dead in midair. The winged Nomu overshot him, its claws grasping at empty sky. As it passed, Izuku fired Black Whip, latching onto its tail. Ride's over! He swung the creature around like a flail, slamming it into the tank Nomu below. Crash! It was a stalemate. He couldn't kill them, they regenerated too fast, and he didn't have the power to vaporize them without hitting 100%. He just had to keep them busy. He glanced toward the tower. He saw 3 small shadows slip into a grate near the foundation. They're in. Okay, Izuku breathed, dodging a hammer blow from the tank Nomu that shook the earth. Now I just have to survive until they send the signal. Inside the spire, the air inside the maintenance tunnels was freezing. The water came up to their waists, black and oily. Momo led the way, holding a waterproof flashlight. Shinso was behind her, his rifle held high. Suyu brought up the rear, swimming more than walking. We're under the cooling vents, Momo whispered, checking her wrist computer. The server room should be directly above us. They reached a service ladder. Shinso climbed up first, peering through the grate. Clear, he whispered. Just automated drones. They climbed out into a corridor of sleek black metal and red lighting. It looked more like the inside of a computer than a building. This way, Momo directed. They ran. They encountered a patrol of security bots, simple tracked units with machine guns. Momo didn't slow down. She created an EMP grenade from the lipids in her arm and tossed it. Zap! The bots slumped, sparking. Save your energy, Shinso warned. We're going to need it at the top. They reached the central elevator shaft. The elevator was locked down. We climbed, Suyu said. She extended her tongue, wrapping it around a cable high above. Grab on. They ascended the shaft, bypassing 50 floors of villain bureaucracy. They could hear the muffled sounds of the battle outside, the boom of Izuku's smashes echoing through the steel. They reached the top floor, the broadcast deck. Shinso kicked the door open. Inside, 3 technicians, civilians forced to work for the PLF, jumped up in terror. Don't move! Shinso barked, aiming his rifle. Hands where I can see them. The technicians froze. Please! We're just maintenance. Get out, Shinso ordered. Run. They didn't argue. They scrambled past the heroes and down the stairs. Momo rushed to the main console. It was a massive bank of screens and dials. Through the panoramic window, they could see the battlefield below. They could see the green flashes of Izuku fighting the monsters in the dust. He's holding them, Suyu said, pressing her hand to the glass. But he's getting tired. Ribbit. I'm patching in, Momo said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She pulled a cable from her pack and jacked it into the terminal. I need 2 minutes to bypass the encryption and align the dish. We might not have 2 minutes, Shinso said. The elevator doors dinged. They hadn't come up the elevator. Someone else was coming up. The doors slid open. Standing there was not a guard. Not a Nomu. It was a woman. She wore a pristine white suit that contrasted sharply with the grime of the world. She had blue skin and pink hair. Dictator. A villain from the Tartarus breakout. Her quirk allowed her to control the bodies of anyone she touched. Intruders, Dictator sighed, adjusting her glasses. Lord Shigaraki will be so displeased. Behind her, a dozen heavily armed PLF soldiers poured out. Tsuyu, Shinso! Buy me time! Momo screamed, not looking up from the screen. Shinso didn't hesitate. He spoke into his voice modulator, mimicking Shigaraki's raspy tone perfectly. Stand down. For a second, the soldiers froze, confusion clouding their discipline. That was all Shinso needed. Brainwashing active. 3 of the soldiers' eyes went blank. They turned and raised their rifles against their comrades. Fire, Shinso commanded. Chaos erupted in the control room. The breaking point. Outside, Izuku was losing. The fight had dragged on for 10 minutes. The Hyans were learning. They were coordinating. The winged Noma strafed him from above, forcing him to dodge, while the lanky one used its whips to restrict his movement. The tank Noma waited for him to land. Izuku took a hit. A whip caught his left leg, slicing through the armor and deep into the muscle. He cried out, stumbling. The tank Noma charged. Izuku raised his arms to block, but the force was too much. He was backhanded across the desert, skipping like a stone over the dunes. He crashed into the hexagonal energy barrier at the base of the tower. The shield flared blue, burning his back. He fell to his knees, gasping. His vision swam. Danger sense was a constant, blinding white noise. Get up, the second user barked. Move, I can't. Izuku wheezed. Blood dripped from his nose into his mask. The 3 Nomas gathered. They sensed weakness. They prowled closer, savoring the kill. Suddenly, the speakers on the tower, huge, stadium-sized megaphones designed to broadcast propaganda, crackled to life. But it wasn't Shigaraki's voice. And it wasn't the looped anthem of the PLF. It was static. Then a voice. Clear, strong, and feminine. This is a message to the world outside. Izuku's head snapped up. Momo. This is Momo Yayorozu of Yue High School, Class 1A. I am broadcasting from the Tartarus Relay in Japan. The Nomas paused, confused by the sound. To the United Nations. To the heroes of America, Europe, and Asia. We know you are listening. We know you are watching. Inside the tower, Momo was screaming into the microphone while typing with one hand, shielding her head as bullets sparked off the console. Shinso and Tsuyu were fighting back to back, holding the doorway against the wave of reinforcements. You have abandoned us, Momo's voice rang out across the wasteland. You have sealed the borders. You have left millions to die in the dark because you are afraid. Izuku forced himself to stand. He used the barrier behind him for support. But we are not dead, Momo shouted. We are still here. We are still fighting. There are survivors in the cities. There are children in the rubble. The signal was boosting. The dish on top of the tower began to rotate, aiming upward toward the satellite constellation. We are requesting immediate assistance. We need food. We need medicine. We need heroes, the winged Noma shrieked, annoyed by the noise. It dove toward the tower, intending to smash the broadcast deck. No! Izuku roared. He couldn't let them touch the tower. He couldn't let them stop the signal. He reached deep. Past the exhaustion. Past the pain. Past the fear of Shigaraki. He found the ember. And he poured gasoline on it. One for all, 45%. The green lightning turned blinding white. The ground beneath him vaporized. He launched. He intercepted the winged Nomu in midair. He grabbed its beak with his good hand. Stay away from them. He spun, throwing the creature downward with such force that when it hit the ground, the shockwave shattered the tank Noma's armor plates standing nearby. The broadcast continued. If you can hear this, if there is anyone left who calls themselves a hero, please. Japan is still alive. Do not let the light go out, the message repeated. Loop. Inside the tower, Momo smashed the upload key. Packet sent. She yelled. It's gone. It's in the network. We have to go. Shinso yelled, tackling a soldier. They're breaching the room. Tsuyu! The window! Momo ordered. Tsuyu grabbed Momo and Shinso with her tongue. Hold on tight, ribbit. She kicked the panoramic glass. It shattered. They jumped. It was a 50-story drop. As they fell, Tsuyu fired a grappling hook she had scavenged. It caught on a lower gantry, swinging them out and away from the tower, toward the drainage canal. Outside, Izuku saw them fall. He saw them swing to safety. Mission accomplished. The Hyans were recovering. They were angry now, but Izuku smiled. Blood stained his teeth. You lose, he whispered. He turned to run. He had to draw them away from the team. But then, the air changed. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a sight. It was a pressure. Every hair on Izuku's body stood up. The danger sense didn't just buzz. It went silent, overloaded by the sheer magnitude of the threat. The sky above the tower darkened. The clouds swirled, forming a vortex. From the center of the vortex, a beam of purple light struck the top of the tower. The transmission dish exploded. Then a voice. Not from the speakers. From everywhere. It resonated in Izuku's bones. A distress call? The voice was dry, scratching, and infinitely cruel. How nostalgic. Izuku froze. He looked up. Floating above the tower, descending slowly like a dark god, was a figure. He was far away, but Izuku could see him perfectly. The white hair. The tattered suit. The aura of pure decay that withered the air around him. Tamayara Shigaraki. He had come. Run, Izuku whispered to himself. Shigaraki raised a hand. He pointed a finger at the tiny green speck in the desert. I see you, little brother. Izuku didn't hesitate. He turned and ran. Gear shift. Overdrive. He broke the sound barrier, tearing across the desert, away from the tower, away from his friends, away from everything. He had to be the bait. He had to lead the devil away. Behind him, a wave of decay washed over the tower. The steel groaned and turned to dust. The structure collapsed in seconds, a mountain of ash falling where hope had just been broadcast. But the signal had gone out. Whether anyone listened was another story. The aftermath? 20 minutes later, the team regrouped in the forest, miles away. They were shivering, wet, and bruised. Momo checked her tablet. The screen was cracked, but the data was there. Did it work? Kirishima asked over the comms from the bunker. Momo looked at the screen. She saw the confirmation. The packet had hit the US, European, and Asian servers before the dish was destroyed. Yes, Momo whispered, tears mixing with the rain on her face. They heard us. And Midoriya? Shinso asked, looking back at the cloud of dust on the horizon. Momo watched the tracking signal on her tablet. It was moving fast. Away from them. Deeper into the Badlands. He's running, Momo said. He's leading Shigaraki away. We have to help him. Tsuyu cried. We can't, Shinso said grimly. That's a fight for gods, not us. We have to wait for the response. Momo looked at the sky. The purple clouds were swirling. Please, she prayed to a world that had forgotten them. Send someone. Anyone. Somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. On the bridge of the USS Ronald Reagan, Admiral Holloway stared at the screen. The message was playing on loop. Japan is still alive. Do not let the light go out. The Admiral's jaw tightened. He looked at the blockade line on the tactical map. Sir, the comms officer said. We have a response. It's not from the UN. It's independent. Who? It's a direct channel request. Priority Alpha. The screen flickered. A face appeared. It wasn't a politician. It wasn't a general. It was a woman with blonde hair and stripes on her costume. Star and Stripe. America's #1 hero. Admiral, she said, her voice like steel. I heard the broadcast. Stand down, Star, the Admiral warned. The President has not authorized an incursion. The quarantine is absolute. Star and Stripe smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a wolf smile. My master's legacy is down there, she said. And some kid just reminded me what a hero is supposed to do. If you cross that line, you are rogue, the Admiral said. We cannot support you. I don't need support, she said. I'm bringing the cavalry. She cut the feed. On the radar, a squadron of fighter jets broke formation. They turned west. Toward the storm.